history of your brand and what makes it unique compared to other champagnes?
So I will say, I'm obviously I'm born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. I'm a Black woman, and I actually produce a French wine. So I'm sure, as many may know, that champagne can only be champagne if it's harvested, grown, bottled in the Champagne region of France, which is about an hour outside of Paris. It's not a norm. There's only a handful of minority women that I do know produces. So I think that's kind of what makes my story a little bit unique. I do not or have not worked in the wine industry before this. I worked on Wall Street for 20 years, from trading to risk management, and I made a decision to take a risk on myself to follow what I love. So because I love what I do, I don't consider it work. I consider it extending my hobby. And I also consider it extending my experience, my knowledge, my love to other consumers that visit our tasting room or who sends in questions or what I know from my level. Some people might think that you have to have this big wine experience to talk about it. You can learn along the way. And sometimes it's just not a reading experience, which is what I started at. I had to immerse myself in the culture, traveling back and forth to France Champagne region. And that's all it really takes. If you can dream it, think it, you can make it happen.
And Marvina, before we move on, how did you fall in love with champagne?
Oh my goodness. So at the legal age, my friends and I, it was three of us. We called it three the hard way. We both grew up in Bedford-Stuyvesant. When we left for colleges, I was the only one to leave the group to go to school further in Virginia. And when we would come home, this would be our catch up. We would buy a bottle. At that time, it was Moet White Star. We would put our little money together, and I emphasize the word little, and we would get plastic cups. We would sit on the stoop, and we would just talk and catch up. That's where it started at. Working in the finance industry, I kind of like refined myself, where I began sending gifts to my clients and some of my coworkers that I liked, and versus sending the popular big name brands, I would send them more of a grower champagne, and I would tell them the story behind it. I would say, here's a bottle. I write like a nice card and tell them, I picked this brand for you. This is a little bit about the house. I'll give them pairing notes so that you can enhance your wine. And that actually how I really started. And I fell in love with champagne. I started reading more and more and more, falling more out of love with finance. And that's how I knew I had to go, because I was leaving every work on Friday, catching that flight out Friday, coming back Monday morning. And I was getting more unique with my gifts because I was finding the bottles that I wanted to gift to my friends, clients, or whoever in France, bring them back in my luggage, and then say, hey, you're not gonna find this in the States, this is something unique. So that's how I fell in love with it. The brand really wasn't meant to be retail, which I'm happy it is. I was on the cusp of opening up a champagne bar right before the pandemic hit. That's when I got my first inventory. And unfortunately, things, shifted to the better for myself, and this became the business. I started out in my living room. The hallway was the warehouse. The kitchen was the conference room. The living room was the packing room. The backyard was extra storage. My bedroom was my private office. And we expanded out. And to this date, we have a great 2,000 square foot tasting room in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. So everything happens for a reason. So I'm really happy on how I triumphed, how I fell in love with it. And that's how it all started.
Congratulations.
At the legal age.
Now, Sarah.
Oh, no.
As the CEO and founder of BOXT, a unique product to say the least, I wanted to ask if you can tell us the inspiration, one, behind the design and the mission of the wine you create.
Yeah, so BOXT, I never go anywhere without my box. Something I learned early, but we're on a mission to be your house wine. I drink all the wine, pie chart of wine. I drink all of it, including bubbles and champagne. But I wanted a wine for my house. And similarly, I did a lot of traveling in my first career. And, you go to France and you're sitting in Paris and you say, I'll take a carafe of the house wine. And you don't think about it. You just get it and it's good and you take it and you're like, I'll take another one of those. But in the States, house wine is disgusting. Like, it's just not good. And I was like, how do I create a house wine for my house? I was a little bit of a crisis. I had this big, great, beautiful career. And then I got married in my late 30s. And then I had a kid. and I'm 44, and I was like, what am I doing? I mean, like, how do I do all this thing? And I met somebody, and he said, you should be an entrepreneur. And we thought that I was going to start a company in education technology where I spent my entire career. And then I started BOXT, a luxury boxed wine brand for your home. And that's it. Like, I just decided I needed a great glass of wine that didn't, give me a hangover, that didn't have all the additives, like all the things. And it's just a smarter way to drink wine at home in a box because it stays fresh for 6 weeks. And so that's kind of how it all began.
Phenomenal. And speaking of understanding additives, I think that's a perfect segue into Avaline. So, Jessica, you are the founding VP of Brand and Innovation at Avaline. And I wanted to ask, how does Avaline differentiate itself in the crowded wine market?
Yeah. One thing that I am just so fascinated by is the number of wine brands that are out there. And there's actually 13,000 selling in the United States right now. 13,000 brands. That's not even the bottle. So all of us have to work very hard to differentiate. And our founding story comes back to really our founder's journey. Avaline is co-founded by a woman you may know, Cameron Diaz, and her friend Catherine Power. I think, heard of her. And it's, while, you may hear Cameron and think celebrity wine brand, it was really a personal mission and something that both of the founders as well as I am super invested in, which is making organic and transparently produced wine more accessible to consumers across the country. So I know a lot of us live in New York, live in LA, where we have access to great bottle shops that have lots of organic wine. But if you go to the middle of the country, it's actually really hard to find great organically produced wine that's labeled clearly, where you understand exactly what's going into the bottle. And so that was really the genesis for the start of the company.
Can you explain the challenges that you faced with bringing transparency to a label? Because I understand the complications that go with creating wine labels. My background is in the wine industry, and wine labels are created with this form called the TTB. And anyone who's ever had to deal with the TTB it is a nightmare. So the fact that you were able to create such a transparent wine label, can you go into that story for us a little bit?
Of course. I think that there have been multiple challenges, one of which has been the TTB, who have several times rejected our labels for the information that we put on the bottle, which is literally the ingredients and nutritional information, which, if we're looking at our crackers or literally anything else that we put in our body, we expect to have transparency into that information. But actually, there was a study that just came out this week in a survey of wine industry business owners that 80% don't want to add nutritional information to the bottle. But I actually think it's a huge opportunity for the industry. If you look at the way that wine is moving, it's not moving with the trends and with where the consumer is going. And there is, I think, an assumption that wine is worse for you than other alcohol beverages because they're just not having that conversation now. So I think that's a huge opportunity. And obviously, with this conversation, there's been a lot of resistance from the industry. And I think, some of it I totally understand. And some of it I feel like, in 10 years, it's just going to be part
of every bottle.
Exactly. So I'm really excited to be a part of that change.
Phenomenal. Going back to you, Sarah, being an entrepreneur, how did you navigate the entrepreneurship being in the wine industry, not having necessarily the background, and also being a woman?
Well, being a woman had nothing to do with it. I mean, if I'm being really honest, people ask me all the time, like, what does it feel like to be a female entrepreneur? I don't know any different. Like, that's just, the nature of who I am. Like, I was born a female, and I am a female. And so I think that all of us have things that we have to overcome in life that are part of our identity. And you can either choose to let it be an obstacle or you can choose to let it be an opportunity. And I'm using it as an opportunity. So that's like the first thing. And then in the wine industry, like everything else, I was really, when you were talking about, I didn't know anything. Like, I didn't know anything other than what I liked when I started in the industry. And I started seeking things out and I started asking a lot of questions. And asking questions. I introduced myself to people and I found people that I could talk to. And, you know, that's what it was like. I've always seen the world through the lens of how can we versus why we can't. Mm-hmm. And so when I ultimately decided to start this company, I had people say, like, that's not how we do it, or, you know, because the way we even do our wines is around taste profiles versus talking about the variety. And because if we're going to be house wine, I need to make it really easy for you to find something that you're going to like. And I also want you to drink other things. I don't want you to only drink my wine. So if you like my number one, which one of the Avaline wines would you like to drink? Mm-hmm. I'm okay with that because there's plenty of wine drinkers that can be having it all. And so I found that by being open to the possibilities and asking a lot of questions and meeting a lot of people, I could create a brand that made sense and could ultimately be successful.
Going off of that, and this is a question for all three of you, how have you incorporated sustainability and social responsibility into your business models now?
Well, I mean, I put my wine in a box. Okay. So the reality is, with all respect to the bottle, only 31% of glass is recycled in this country, and in Europe it's like 74%. We do not do a good job of recycling and making glass. There's all sorts of things that go into it. And so for the 92% of wine that is made to be consumed within the year, if we all put it in a box, we would take 400,000 cars off the streets. Like, that's just like the thing. So for a house wine, where it's Tuesday, I just want a glass. I don't want to open the bottle. No offense.
I get it.
You know, it makes sense to be in a box. It stays fresh for 6 weeks. And so for us, like, that's like step one. And then there's all sorts of other things. Like, I hope the brand gets big enough that I can start putting money into how to make the bag compostable. I mean, like, yay, that's the real dream now. I'm like, okay, how can we get even further? But it doesn't mean I don't drink bottles. I drink a pie chart of wine. On Tuesday, I drink boxed. And Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, sometimes Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. But I also drink bottles too. But the reality is bottles in your brain you think are, oh yeah, they're better for the environment. They're very heavy to ship, all those things. And like I said, so for us, like, part of why it made sense for people to invest in my company was that, oh wait, and it's really good for the environment, or better for the environment.
Champagne is very different. As much as we would like to be in a box, it cannot be in a box. For, you know, patented reasons, it has to go through a second fermentation in the actual bottle. Yep. What I would say is done for my specific vineyard that we work on, like, we don't use pesticides. But what we do ship in to import over to the United States, we do use recycled boxes. For when I first launched, we used to do styrofoam. You know, in New York recently, a couple years ago, styrofoam is no longer, it's not considered legal. So we find biodegradable fillers that we use in our boxes. So that's where we're at in that process. About a month ago, there's an article that came out. There's a company in France that's actually tried to find a lighter bottle that can also handle the fermentation in the bottle so that, you know, it's carbonated. Many people have tried it, but it was not successful. So they finally found a bottle, success. I will not be the first house to actually try it because I don't have the funding to go through all those bottles. But there are other houses that are much larger that have said they're going to attempt to see if it works. So I've spoken to our head winemaker to see what was his view on it, and he has his own views, and he says, let them try first. Let's go with what we know right now, and then that's my view on it.
Cool. And at Avaline, our sustainability mission really starts with the organic grapes. Organic is such a tricky place in the wine industry, and I'm sure a lot of you lived through a time when organic wine was kind of big in the 90s, but then everyone tried it and they were like, oh, this isn't very good. I don't want to drink, or I want to, but I don't want to drink it. So with Cameron as kind of the megaphone behind Avaline, one of her goals is to make consumers aware that organic wine is an option and it is at your grocery store in the wine category, I believe organic penetration is only at 2% versus produce, which is 14%. And those are both things that are harvested and that you consume and you put in your body. So I feel like that delta is just a huge opportunity. And a lot of consumers don't even think right now, should my wine be organic? So that education and, of course, providing an organic product are huge pillars for the Avaline mission.
I remember early in our shipping days, we were, as an entrepreneur, like, all the things happen that you don't think are going to happen. I mean, post-bagging fermentation, who's ever heard of that? I have. Now I have. I didn't before.
Yeah, not fun.
That just means floating boxes,
yeah.
Right? So there was a moment we were shipping the box in, there was peanuts around it. But thankfully, we found the cornstarch peanuts.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so somebody sent this really mean email, oh my God, I can't believe you use peanuts. And then I just sent a video of my then 3-year-old squirting it with food color water, and they were dissolving. I was like, yeah, it's dissolvable, but you're good. And so I can see there's so many opportunities, right? Even with shipping bottles, it's can we create that carrier that's cornstarch, and then we can all use water guns to make the cornstarch packaging go away. And I just think there are really a lot of cool things in sustainability, because I'm not saying don't drink from a bottle. You should definitely drink from a bottle, particularly you have to. But there's always an occasion for bottles in my life too. So I just think there's really cool things also in the wrapping that is yet to come, and I look forward to all of us being able to invest in that next generation of sustainability.
Quickly, what are you hoping, each of you, what are you hoping to see to either disappear from the wine industry or be added to the wine industry? If you had to give one or two things.
I think you're starting to see it, but just this welcoming of really the average consumer. I feel like wine has gotten to a place that it's so inaccessible, and I think it's a detriment to the category, and there's just so much opportunity to use more accessible language like you are, or provide really inclusive tasting experiences. So I'm really excited to see maybe the next generation of wine brands start to emerge and drive the conversation in the industry and just create a more inclusive community.
I mean, it's yes, exactly, right? It's Motel 6, the lights on. It's kind of the same thing, right? You go here, and it's why we exist. You go to a restaurant here, and it's this crazy list, and you're it's so uncomfortable. And it's not just uncomfortable for every day. It's uncomfortable for the people who think that they are wine connoisseurs. And to the extent that wine can be more accessible and easier to just get to the glass. Whether you're sitting at home or at a bar or at a restaurant and you just want a glass, get to the glass faster, enjoy it faster, and feel like you know what you're talking about without, in so many other parts of the world, it's about the experience. And here in the States, somehow we've made it so complex that it's hard to get to the glass. And let's just get to the glass. Because it's about the experience and the relationship and, why are you having this glass? Who are you with? What's that story? Because that's what matters, and that's what we tell each other about,
I would say for myself is two things. One, I would like to see more of open-mindedness of diversity in the wine industry, specifically at trade shows. When you're introducing your wines, there have been times when I'm behind the table because I'm very hands-on in my brand, and people are saying, well, who's the owner? Well, where's this person? And where's that? And I'm like, oh, well, I'm the owner of the brand. Well, are you sure? I know who I am. So yes, I am sure. Another thing that I think is very important, and a comment you mentioned is layman's terms for wine, right? You can go out to a nice fancy restaurant and they have all these fancy technology or even fancy words, right? I think, in my opinion, the responsibility of retailers or wine shops or restaurants is you have an opportunity to introduce consumers to different wines or in that capacity. So be open-minded of having other brands than just the big houses, right? You have the responsibility to say, hey, this is my time to introduce you to something new. And that's something that I'm really strong on. Though I own my own champagne, I don't bring B Stuyvesant home, right? I take my time to sell and purchase other brands so that when people ask me about recommendations, I want to turn you on to something new other than my brand, which is, feel free to buy it naturally, but also let me give you some knowledge back because, everybody's palate is unique. And I think wine is a great topic in any industry. It's a great thing for networking as we are here today, but give back and understand retailers, venues, that you have the opportunity to further educate the consumers that come in.
Well, thank you so much, ladies, and cheers, everyone.